Hi, I'm Jamie.
And I'm Scott.
And welcome to the God or Not podcast, where truth springs from argument among friends. This is episode number 12. And coming up, Scott and I will be talking about Prejudice. Also in this episode, the God or Not book club. So grab your popcorn, sit back, and enjoy the show.
Ladies and gentlemen, please direct your attention to the center ring. This is the God or Not podcast. We're in for a great night of civil discourse here as these two warriors are revved up and ready to go. And now, let's get ready to dialogue!
Okay, episode number 12. Boy.
All right.
It's flown by.
Yep.
Yeah, it really hasn't, but
the last year and a half has flown by.
2020. We're in 2020, and we will be talking about Prejudice tonight. So this will
seems appropriate for the modern times.
It sure does, and I think that it will be. I think we'll find ourselves in agreement a lot, but I also think that there'll be some areas of maybe digging in our heels, but we'll see. It'll be interesting.
You never know. You never know what you're gonna get. Right? Life's like a box of chocolates.
That's right. So we're amping it up a little bit.
As a wise man once said.
Yeah, he was wise. He was autistic, wasn't he? Was he autistic?
I don't know. I don't know. I'm not sure.
He was a wise man regardless.
Right.
Is this seriously the lamest opening talk of all time? It's like we're out of practice or something.
I think for the first time ever, our listeners are going, come on, let's get to the prejudice.
Yeah,
Bring on the
already.
bigotry. They can't wait to hear the racism.
Well, you know what? No. No. All right. Well,
let's bring it.
Nice
do it.
talking with you, Scott. Yeah, geez.
Yeah.
Help the conversation out a little. All right. Well, I guess without further ado, let's do.
This is the main event. Round 1.
Okay, everybody, Jamie and Scott and Jamie, and today we are talking about prejudice, pseudo-prejudice, and implied prejudice. So, all things prejudice, and I think in my typical fashion, I like to start out by defining a few things. So.
All right.
Unless you have something that before we get going here, Scott.
The only thing I have to say is that I think we should start in your usual fashion of defining a few things.
I'm glad we're on the same page.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess we are.
Literally, too. Also, literally, we're probably on the same page. So, prejudice. Your standard kind of Webster's definition is a preconceived opinion that is not based on reason or actual experience. It involves prejudgments that are usually negative about members of a group. When people hold prejudiced attitudes towards others, they tend to view everyone who fits into that certain group as being, quote, all the same. And they paint every individual holds particular characteristics or beliefs with a very broad brush, and they fail to really look at each person as a unique individual. And so I think that's...
So basically it's just unfairly judging somebody possibly based off of superficial characteristics, but maybe even based off of just nothing. Based off of your preconceived notions or rumors or, just, a wide, very, I guess the idea is it's just not based off of actual experience with a particular person. Or I suppose it doesn't necessarily be limited to people. You can be prejudiced against, pretty much anything, really.
Yeah, I guess.
But I suppose the one we're concerned about is the one against people, though.
Right. So I think it's important, although probably I don't know how to be important and meaningless, but probably important and semi not even pertaining to bring up or to say that some of these prejudgments might be correct. I mean, you might, what do they say? A broken watch is right twice every day.
Right.
So
right.
You might be right.
You could be,
but you got there based on wrong reasoning or fallacious
right. We're
reasoning.
focusing on methodology here, not results.
Correct. So one of the things that, as I was kind of researching this, one of the things I saw was I thought was interesting. Was a quote from a psychologist, Gordon Allport. He says, the human mind must think with the aid of categories. And he goes on to explain in his book that once these categories are formed, they are the basis for normal prejudgment. And we cannot possibly avoid the process, and that orderly living depends on it. And so, this is part of sometimes why we see the prejudice and us as human beings sometimes so easily falling into that is because we all like to categorize things.
We're really good at that.
Yes.
We're good at categorizing.
Yes, we are.
And you know what? That all stems from the fact that we just have incomplete information. We don't know everything there is to know about the world, but we still have to act, and we still have to react. And so, should we just have a random, reaction, or do we want to base off of these categories? And the problem and the advantage of that is that you don't have to sit there and get a full analysis of every situation you run into. But the drawback of that, of course, is that very often it can lead to it can lead to incorrect results.
So another interesting piece of information that I thought was insightful is that a lot of times when we do use these categories and we're categorizing people, we tend to minimize the difference between people in certain groups and exaggerate the difference between people in other groups. And so a lot of times, we'll see, we might have some similarities, but we tend to exaggerate our differences and not necessarily some of those things that are the same about someone. So,
it's kind of like, you'll hear people say, well, not necessarily people will say this, but, like, all people from this group, look the same kind of thing, that kind of thing, it's minimizing this. Yeah. Like you said, minimizing the differences between the individuals within a group, but then also exaggerating the differences between the groups.
You're right. So let's also too, there's some other words that probably need to be defined because sometimes they're attached or associated with this word prejudice. So racist, a Webster's basic definition of racist is a person who shows or feels discrimination or prejudice against a people of other races, or who believes that their particular race is superior to another. So it's basically a form of prejudice. And it's based upon skin. Bigot. You often hear people being called bigots. You bigot. I've been called that more than once. And this is a person who is intolerant towards those holding different opinions. And now that brings up, don't you love when a definition, you're looking up a word and then you have to look up another word that's in that definition of the first word? And that's what we're doing right now, because the word tolerance is the ability or willingness to endure something, in particular, the existence of opinions or behaviors that one does not necessarily agree with.
All right.
And it's important to point out that tolerance does not imply the acceptance of others' intolerant behaviors. I think that's something that you wanted to talk about there.
Right. Yeah. You're talking about tolerance, and every once in a while you hear this, wow, is this how people who are supposed to be tolerant are acting? But, the whole idea that, well, if somebody's going to be tolerant, they need to tolerate intolerance. And of course, that's ridiculous. The whole idea of an intolerant behavior or an intolerant attitude, it goes against the whole idea of tolerance. And so, so we need to be careful when we consider that. It's
but shouldn't tolerance, isn't that the very definition of tolerance though? Like this is where I might disagree with you, because where I find this happening is that somebody will say, you Christians, you guys need to tolerate. You need to tolerate all, these other beliefs or these other things. And I think that by very definition, other people aren't tolerating our beliefs. Then the question is if you want to say
tolerating. Sorry, go ahead.
You're going to say they're not tolerating intolerance, but who gets to decide that? Who gets to decide what? But see, by very definition, the word tolerant means that you're going to put up with something you don't agree with.
Right.
Intolerance is something that you might not agree with. Right? So I'm not saying that you should accept what we think as true. Like, oh yeah, that's a good thing. That's a true thing. But what I'm saying is, isn't it by very definition, aren't they breaking? Isn't it self-refuting? I mean, shouldn't they have to tolerate what they believe to be intolerance? Because I mean, who's to decide what's tolerant, what's intolerant?
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yep. Yeah, I totally get what you're saying, and I think what we've uncovered there is that when people say you should be tolerant of others, it doesn't mean just blanket tolerance. It doesn't mean It means that you should be tolerant of other people's beliefs, but that doesn't mean you need to tolerate intolerance. That's the exact opposite of what being tolerant is. If you allow someone else, or if you are accepting of somebody else being intolerant, then you are promoting intolerance. And so it's the exact opposite. And so, it's kind of a paradox there, but that's the way it is.
It seems somewhat self-refuting to me, because that's what gets leveled. That's a charge that often gets leveled towards us, Christians, a lot of times. So like, well,
right.
I guess the question then is, it isn't so much about should we tolerate intolerance. The real question, if you kick the can back further, is what do you consider intolerant, if that makes sense? Because we can all say there are certain behaviors that we shouldn't tolerate. We shouldn't tolerate pedophilia. We shouldn't tolerate, just going around and shooting people. There's a lot of things we shouldn't tolerate.
Right.
But,
the distinction there. The distinction there is we need to be clear on what it is we should be tolerant of. Like, for example, child rape and shooting people. In those cases, you're actually you're injuring somebody else, you're harming somebody else, you're violating somebody else's rights, and those kind of things. There are other things though that might not fall into that category. But I think, like I said, what we've uncovered here is that we can't just it's not just a word out of a dictionary and then we just kind of, throw it around. We have to apply it. There's people involved. There's, social interactions. It's within a context of a society. And so we need to, so if somebody says you need to be intolerant of my racism, no, that's against what the whole idea of tolerance is about. And so we need to make a distinction there.
Okay, very good. Well, let's talk about stereotyping.
Okay.
Stereotyping is a simplified assumption about a group based upon prior experiences or belief. So, like, I don't know, cops like donuts. or all firemen do are wash
well, cops do like donuts because they are actually, after all, they are human beings. All human beings like donuts.
They love crispy. Listen, part of stereotypes that I find true is that a lot of stereotypes have some truth to it. That's how they became stereotypes, right? Firemen, for instance, the stereotype that firemen, all you guys do are play cards and wash your cars, and maybe watch HBO. You could throw that in there now. The reason why that stereotype is there is because, newsflash, some firemen, sometimes we have some downtime, and a lot of times we'll play cards or we'll wash our car. Right. Or we'll watch HBO, so that's why sometimes stereotype. And why do cops get stereotyped as liking donuts? I don't know. Maybe because you see their cruisers out in front of Dunkin' Donuts. I think I could say that because my dad was a cop for 35 years. So,
well, I guess it makes it okay then.
Yeah, it does make it okay. So I can be somewhat intolerant of the anyhow. And stereotypes can be positive too. For instance, like the idea women are warm and nurturing. I mean, I suppose could be considered a positive stereotype, or again, negative.
Depending on how you say it. Yeah, depending on how
teenagers are lazy. You're a bunch of lazy, no good. Nothings. And of course, that could be bad. So you could have good and bad stereotypes, I guess. And stereotypes don't always lead to false conclusions. They're often hyperactive categorizers, that we end up, throwing people into a group.
Right. Yeah. Before we leave the definitions behind, I did want to briefly address the idea of race. And nowadays there's I think a more enlightened view of race. If you look at individuals of a same quote unquote race, we find that in reality, biologically, there's way more differences within groups than there is actually between groups. And so some people will say that race is really more of a social construct. And in many ways it is. Obviously, there's some biology involved in how people come to their categorizing, but the idea is that in reality, we're the human race, really, and so in many ways, these distinctions that we have, and we'll be talking about this more as we go through, the evening here, but a lot of these distinctions are, like you said, we're hyperactive categorizers, and so it's like we're clawing at every little possible difference there that when we try to tear it into a big gash, and so the idea of race really, if you talk to a sociologist or statisticians and that kind of thing, you'll find that people kind of categorize themselves into race or each other's into race, but really when it boils down to the nuts and bolts, there's really not much to that. That doesn't mean it's a useless thing to do. There's a lot. Like names. We have family names, we have individual names, and there's really not. Those are all just kind of made up, and and they're still useful. But just so we, air some of that out a little bit. Sure. A lot of these things are kind of trumped up, and exaggerated differences, and so we need to be keeping that in mind as well.
One race, the human race. That's exactly what I always like to say. So speaking of race, that was kind of one of the first examples of prejudice. Is I wanted to talk a little bit about racism.
Right.
And obviously, racism is a prejudice or a discrimination directed against someone of a different race based upon the belief that their own race is superior and that other person's race is inferior. And a lot of times we would see this. The big one that you could think of is either like Caucasian or Eastern European and African American. When you think of racism, at least as Americans, I know we have a few people who listen from across the pond, but here in America, a lot of times when we think of racism, we think of black versus white.
Right.
And
I would say that's a common one in the United States. Yeah,
because of course we had the battle. Of course, there's obviously still slavery going on all over the world, but here in the United States, our attempt to eradicate slavery, and of course, not just African Americans were enslaved. There were obviously other groups enslaved, but they were the big group. Or the most notable group that was enslaved, and so that's kind of what we think of, when we think of racism. Yeah,
the slavery that the United States was involved in, and in many parts of Europe as well at some point. I think it's a difference of magnitude there, and also it's a difference of, because it was a slave trade and it was an industry. Right. And it was, big, there was, the triangle trade with, I don't know what was being traded, like sugar and tobacco, or I can't remember what the other two things were, but there was like a 3-way trade across the Atlantic Ocean. And, it was big business. And so that kind of magnified the whole thing, and it dehumanized the quote unquote product. And in fact, in many of the ship, you see this show up in movies all the time, like Amistad and stuff like that, where the people that were enslaved are referred to as, poundage or, quantities and things like that. And so I think that, it's that kind of magnified the issue. And I think that, really, It really, I don't know, maybe this is how I feel about it, but maybe you feel differently and maybe you feel the same. I don't know, but it really kind of strikes it. It really makes it personally and nationally shameful. It's shameful. Obviously, slavery in any form is horrible, but to me, it's that particular way of doing it is just unusually shameful. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
You mean way of doing slavery?
Right. The way that the United States was involved in that and so on.
Sure. I think so. I tend to also look at the positive too, and excited for the future in terms of look what America has helped lead the way to eradicate or to work towards eradicating slavery and prejudice and racism. And while we still have our problems, no doubt, I think that we've also taken some huge steps. Look, up until the 60s, there was still like hardcore, like, no, you can't sit at this lunch counter kind of racism going on. And in just, in just what, 70, 60, 70 years. I had to do the math. I had my hands open, and I had to pull my sock.
I'm proud of you.
So, I'm proud of you. But, I think we've come a long way. Like I said, we still have a ways to go, but I think that we have, and that doesn't take away the past. But obviously you and I had nothing to do with that. And so I think you and I are a part of the people who are trying to forge a new way, a new understanding of who people are. Obviously,
I hope so.
With our podcast, our ability to communicate with other people who think differently than we do. I think you and I are both in that boat where we're trying to make things better.
Right. Hopefully we're at least going a step in the right direction.
So I know you wanted to talk a little bit about Black Lives Matter.
Right.
So what were you thinking about that?
Well, this is one of those things that, my thinking on it has actually changed within the last several years. When it first started coming out, I try to get news from a variety of sources, but, kind of my thoughts on the quote unquote Black Lives Matter movement. And I suppose if there's anybody listening that's not really familiar with that, that's something that's come up in the last several years in the United States. I'm not sure if it's a worldwide phenomenon or, mostly what we hear about is things happening around here. But the idea that, Black communities wanting to stand up and assert the fact that, that we matter, that we make a difference. And my first thought was, I always try to approach things cautiously when I'm thinking about something new. And so I thought, well, of course, to me it seems, well, of course that makes a difference. But are you downplaying other people's lives? And so I don't know if I've ever said the phrase "all lives matter," but my thinking at one point was kind of in line with that. And talking to minority friends of mine and what they think about it and experiences that they've gone through, I came to realize that, well, really, what they're doing is it's what they're saying. That's what they're saying. They're not saying that Black lives matter more. What they're saying is Black lives matter as much. And the reason that it's important that needs to be said is that, and I know we're going to be, down the road here, we're going to be talking about institutional and systematic prejudice, but I mean that's what they're combating against. They're combating against this societal viewpoint or a view that it's demonstrable that white lives matter, and they felt like, okay, well, we need to, we're at the same table too. And so what they're doing is they're asserting that they're saying, we matter too. And I think that's admirable. And I think that's well needed. I felt the same way about, I'm a teacher, we know, and things like equal opportunity and that kind of thing, where, in hiring processes and things like that, where, attempts are made to make sure like a faculty is diverse and things like that. As a white applicant, you might feel like, well, that's not fair to me to choose somebody because they're a racial minority. But when you think of it in terms of at the societal level, that, well, if you want things to be equal, you can't just say, well, we're going to be equal, and from now on, boom, we're equal. You have to consciously do that. You have to consciously approach these communities and these groups that have been underrepresented for such a long time. You can't just switch gears and move on. You have to embellish that. You have to bring it to the forefront, so that way it becomes part of the idea. And I'm saying this as a white man. I would welcome input from anybody from a minority group, but I think that the point of the Black Lives Matter movement is to eventually get to a point where somebody could say all lives matter and really mean it. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. So you brought up a lot of things there that I do want to touch on. I'm a part of the people that say, yeah, all lives matter. And I think part of the pushback was that when they came out really big with the Black Lives Matter, it seemed, at least from my vantage, as if they were saying that yeah, our lives matter more than your lives, or somehow downplaying. So your initial assessment, that idea that, but then when you talk to your friends, they said, no, that's not what we meant at all. Of course we would. I don't want to say, of course we would all agree, because I still have to remember there are people out there that don't. But you and I would obviously agree that all lives matter. But when it came out, that's, at least from my vantage, that's not the way it looked. It almost looked as if like, they were presupposing right off the bat that we're going to be prejudiced or racist against them. And so that's why I think you had that pushback of all lives matter. And, I've had a personal experience with this. When I got out of high school, all I wanted to do was be a fireman. That's all I wanted to do. I worked 2 jobs so that I could have money to go to paramedic school. And I went through paramedic school, and I paid my way, through through part of my fire training, and I went to all these other schools to get all these extra trainings so that I could have them. And this was before I was a fireman, because I wanted to look as good as possible. When my application came across civil service desk or the chief's desk or whatever. And so I take the test. I study for 6 months. 6 months. I took all kinds of tests. I took over 70 tests to be a fireman, different municipalities, cities, townships. And when Youngstown's came up, I studied for 6 months for that test. I scored a 97.5 raw on that, and I ended up being like 120 with my credit for being a paramedic. And I sat at technically it was number 2 on the list. I was number 4 on the list, but 2 people opted out. 2 in front of me opted out. So I was number 2 on the list. I sat there for 2 years while they hired minorities. And to me, that of course did not seem right at all.
Right.
I'd worked so hard to get where I was and wanted that job so badly. And here I'm getting passed over because of the color of my skin. Right. And I was like, man, how is that right? Like, right. And the test was as fair as you can get. They gave you a booklet, a little 30-page booklet, and said every single question on the test is coming from this booklet. Everybody's going to have equal time to study this thing. And so it wasn't like I had some kind of knowledge that somebody else didn't have and had some kind of advantage. Like, it was straight down the line. The harder you studied, the more you wanted it, more than likely, the better off on the list you were going to be. Right. And so for me, that was difficult because here I see people saying, listen, skin color shouldn't matter, except if you're white, then it matters. Like, to me, so that was hard for me, especially someone who's always had friends of other religions and other races. And I just happen to be the kind of person that attracts other types of people. And I mean, you and I obviously became friends because we had our vast differences and we began talking. And so it just seems so unjust that I would get passed over for 2 years.
Well, let me, I totally understand what you're saying. I get it. I understand why you would feel that way. I'm sure most of us have felt like that in some circumstances. What I would say is that, consider the fact that you're viewing it from a privileged perspective. Okay?
Now, hold on. Privileged perspective in what way? I grew up dirt poor. Right. I grew up in one of the worst school districts in the state of Ohio. Dirt poor, like government cheese poor. Right. So I don't know where my privilege was. Maybe now you could say I have a certain amount of privilege, but I don't know where Where was my privilege? Where was my privilege from high school, from before high school? If I was dirt poor, where was my privilege between there and the time that I got hired on the fire department?
I'll put my finger on it. Okay. So I've heard this said from other people, something along the lines of, I was raised in a dirt poor family. I worked my butt off to get where I am. How does that make me privileged? Right.
Right. Yeah.
And here's my answer. Wouldn't it be awesome if everybody could get from dirt poor to where you are just by working hard? That's your privilege.
Okay. So
you had the opportunity to, all you had to do was work hard to get from dirt poor to where you are now. I think that opportunity is not available to everybody.
Okay.
Some people work their butts off their whole life, but are stuck in a rut and stay in that
Give me an
level.
example.
So
give me an example.
Awesome.
Give me an example. Like, what kind of rut are we talking about that they can't, that would be legal Like, you know, that they would get stuck in, that they would have no means or no way to get around through hard work.
There's the amount of research that have gone into, I don't know anybody personally.
No, not a person.
I'm in a privileged position myself.
List a thing that happens here in America where that people couldn't take either legal action because they're being. No,
you're not hearing me. It's a matter of opportunity. You know, opportunities don't exist the same for everybody. You know, United States has a very low social mobility index, or whatever they call it. You know, once if you start out in a particular social group, it's hard to to work your way up the ladder, especially for minority groups. You know, if you're a white male, it's very easy for you to transition from one social strata to another. All you have to do is work hard, or especially if your family's rich and you have all these other opportunities, it's very easy to do that. But you know, if a black man had been in your exact same situation,
he would have been hired 2 years before me, Scott. Come on.
Listen,
I don't disagree. Listen, I don't disagree with the fact that some people have certain advantages.
Now
and some people
doing that. Now we're doing that because we need to adjust our path here.
So my question is this: are you about equal opportunity or equal outcome?
I'm about equal opportunity.
Okay, so you're not necessarily about equal outcome. Not everybody has to have to, because you know what? A lot of it has to do with
that's not true. That's not true.
Okay.
If there's truly equal opportunity, then equal outcome will happen.
No, it won't, because some people maybe they don't want to work that hard. They don't want to be a doctor. They want to work at the factory and they want to go to work for GM. So they don't go to college. So that's equal opportunity.
That would be true across the board.
But that's equal opportunity. That's not equal outcome.
There are people that are sitting on Wall Street now that have not worked thetheir butt off.
You're right. You're absolutely right.
Okay.
Listen,
so that's what we're talking about here.
But I see the thing that bothers me is, and this isn't just a race thing, right? So we could even say like a class thing. Like I saw my father-in-law. He was a family doctor. There were months that he couldn't take a paycheck, right? Because he was paying for things. He had a big facility, not a big facility, but a multi office facility that he had to pay rent on, and do all these things. And but you have this impression in your mind that doctors, they're wealthy, and and they're just rolling in it, and you see a lot of this envy, class envy. People automatically assuming that people are in certain, that they have it good in this way or that way. And a lot of times it's just not true. It's just, or there's extenuating circumstances. Like, I played in a band and we were doing really, really well. We recorded a CD on a record label, and we toured for a while. And I had this thought one time when I was on stage that, I bet you there are people out there. And it was probably about 4,000 or 5,000 people in the audience. And I was thinking, there's probably people out there thinking right now, look at that guy. All he has to do is play drums. And he gets to tour the country, drug, sex, and rock and roll. Like, he's hamming it up, and all he has to do is play drums. But what they didn't see was the 8 years prior to that. 8 long years of playing in every Tom, Dick, and Harry dive bar for the security guard and the barmaid. You know what I'm saying? And just hustling and busting my hump, going to paramedic school, working a job, and practicing 3 days a week and playing one. And so, like, I just knew that there were people out there that, I don't want to say were envious, but were almost bitter that I had what I had. And they assumed that all I had to do was play drums to get it, and that somehow I didn't deserve what I had. And I think it's a form of prejudice. I think that professional athletes, I think they deserve every penny they make. Listen, I know some people who forewent all kinds of stuff during their middle school and high school years so they could continue to fine tune their craft, whatever it is, basketball or football or whatever, so that they could go on and move up in the ranks. And I know a few that have gotten to the professional level. It came with sacrifice and hard work, but there are people out there that say, no. They don't deserve what they get.
That would be awesome if everybody could be successful just by sacrificing and hard work. I just want you to consider, all I want you to take out of this is just consider the fact that maybe you're not seeing the world the way a lot of people see the world. Okay. Just consider that. You don't have to, change your mind right now. Just think about the possibility that the world looks different to different people. It's difficult to understand what somebody else is going through simply because of your perspective. And this is true for everybody, no matter what, social status you are, no matter what economic status you are.
I'm not without a heart. I'm not without a heart. I empathize.
That has nothing to do with, it has nothing to do with heart. It has nothing to do with empathizing with other people. And not what I'm talking about right now. Not what I'm talking about in this particular, sentence here. Okay. What I'm saying is just consider the fact that maybe you don't see things the way that other people see things. That's all I want to say about that.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't disagree with that. I know that I don't have all the answers. I know that I can't see the entire, I can't get a survey of everything, and that I'm in a very small slice of the pie, so to speak. I can only see so much. I can only experience so much. And I'm not taking away from anybody. I don't want to take away from anybody. I have sat as a white male, a Christian white male, and pretty soon, not yet, but pretty soon to be an old Christian white male. And all I've gotten my whole life from the other side is just arrows, fiery arrows, because I'm a white male Christian, soon to be old person, old white Christian male. These fiery arrows. And I'm like, man, what have I ever done? We're trying to love people and be kind, talk to people of other, of other opinions, and like, it's just that I guess if the pushback wasn't so hard, I haven't been, of course, I've been personally accused of being a racist. Of course I have, because I've been online, and I've been personally accused of being sexist and a homophobe and a bigot, all because of the positions I hold. But it's just the pushback has been so hard. But I know what I've experienced, and my experience has been, man, I just want to love people. I want to show them Christ in my behavior and my attitude. I want to work really hard, and I want the same for others. Mm-hmm. But I feel that sometimes it's reversed. That somehow I'm the evil white male, and somehow just because of the color of my skin or my sex, that I'm bad. I think a lot of people have labeled us as just somehow being evil or bad, inherently just bad because of that I'm white and that I'm a male. But I digress. You want to also talk about immigrants in cages? I have no idea what that's about.
Well, it's just we talked about America's racist past, and we're seeing a resurgence of that nowadays. That's kind of the latest thing, coming back, and treating immigrants as animals, separating children from their families. I mean, we can't really leave this
Scott.
conversation without bringing that kind of thing up.
Help me, Scott. Really?
You're okay with that?
Really? Okay, so listen.
Well, hold on.
Right.
Are you okay with that?
I'm okay if somebody comes into the country illegally. I'm okay with them being.
Okay, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about illegal.
Okay, so hold on a second. So you're not talking about illegal people coming into the. What are we talking about?
Legally seeking asylum.
Okay, hold on a second. No. What do you mean illegally seeking asylum? What do you mean by that? What does that mean to you?
Just those words. What do you mean? Isn't that descriptive enough?
Is there a process? Are we talking about a process that we have here in this country for people coming in seeking asylum? Right? There's a process, right?
So what do you think is happening? What do you think is happening here?
Well, people seek asylum for all kinds of reasons, right?
Right.
And so our immigration.
So let's say we do have people coming across the border illegally,
right?
So you think that's okay to take their children?
I think that if you break the law of a country,
so yes.
Well, what are we to do?
If you're going to say yes, say yes.
Yeah, I think they should go to whatever the consequences are for breaking the law. Yes.
Okay.
Now listen, if I could make the rules, are you asking me if I could enforce the rules or make the rules? I would do my very best to try to keep families together. But we separate families all the time in this country. People break the law, they go to jail. Now, I don't think that the people should go to jail just for trying to enter our country. Obviously, if they're seeking asylum because they're being persecuted or something of that nature, then yes, that's why we have a process for these kind of things. But if you're just sneaking into our country because you want to be in our country and you're circumventing the entire system and you're going in front of people that have legally, listen, I have a brother-in-law and a close friend of the family that have both worked very hard to become American citizens. And they've had to go through a process. And I don't think that people should just be allowed to walk into our country and circumvent that process. That's all I'm saying. I think there should be a process for people to enter the country, and there is. And if you break that, you're temporarily probably going to go to jail until you're deported to go back to your country.
Okay. I think you've said enough then.
Okay. How about sexism?
So what's next?
Talk about sexism?
Sure. Bring it.
All right. So sexism is just prejudice or stereotyping, typically against women on the basis of sex. So, of course, we most of the time when we think of sexism, we think of men, being prejudiced or stereotyping women. Okay. So, what are your thoughts on that?
I'm against it. I would definitely say I'm a feminist. I'm in favor of equal, people of all genders being treated the same, and not have differences based on their gender.
Me too.
Okay.
Perfect. You want to move on?
Well, I mean, I think we want to. I think obviously we need to address the elephant in the room here. Your big book, of course, is extremely sexist and very much plays up on. Plays up on the idea that women are not worth as much as men.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's a message that happens throughout the book.
You're
throughout the book.
Okay. All right. Here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna stop right now. And we'll do a whole show on this if you want. If you want to do, we'll do a whole show on biblical sexism if you want. But part of the problem is this: you automatically assume that the Bible is sexist. So no matter what I say, it's going to look like me trying to fit a square peg in a round hole.
Okay, so why do you think that I'm automatically assuming that?
Well,
so justify that accusation.
You just told me that the whole book is the giant sexist, women-hating literature at its best.
I didn't use any of those words.
Yeah, right. But that's what you were thinking, right?
No.
Okay. So basically you think that the Bible is full of sexism.
I said the whole book all the way through has sexist messages in it.
Okay. I'll ask you this. In the culture, was everyone sexist?
In what culture?
In those cultures back then. I'm talking first century and before.
I have no idea. I would assume probably not.
No, I'm talking about like all people groups. You know, like were the Greeks. Were they probably sexist? Were the Romans sexist?
You mean, is there sexism throughout all?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I'd say that, that's a pretty common part of the human, the human experience.
Right. So,
along with other forms of prejudice. So
I'm assuming you'd hold their feet to the fire as well. Right?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, great. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a whole episode and talk about biblical sexism. I can't even get into it now. How about classism? Classism is a type of prejudice.
Okay.
I'm talking obviously primarily rich versus poor.
Mm-hmm.
So what's your thoughts on that?
Well, again, I mean, I think, we're seeing the face of our country change, and we're seeing, we're seeing rich people taking the reins, and it's really fairly depressing. To be honest, it's really depressing, and it's not surprising at all. I mean, it's happened in history in the past. People who are rich can afford to, they have power. They can afford to pay people to do things, and they can afford to pay the people who are running things, or to be the people who are running things. And so, classism is nothing new. It's unfortunate that we have difficulty learning from history, but of course that's nothing new either. We've seen revolutions and beheadings and all kinds of things in the past when this kind of thing has happened, when the nobility or the upper class take command, and then the lower class rise up, and then there's chaos and the dark ages and all kinds of stuff going on. And I just hope I hope that's not happening now, but we do see echoes of that happening now. We see the rich taking the reins, and it's frustrating.
Is there what would you suggest be done about that?
Well, for me personally, in the United States, we need to get money out of politics. For one thing, money has no business in politics. And so, to me, if that could, that would go a long way in leveling the playing field. If we want to talk our opportunities here, we need to give opportunities for people who can't afford to buy their opportunities.
So when we talk about money in politics, does that include union money?
What union money?
Like money that goes from the unions to support political candidates.
Yes.
Okay.
I would say that as well.
That's fair. Okay. So you're talking about people to give people opportunities who couldn't normally afford it.
Right.
And so what were we talking about? We're talking about college assistants?
Well, no. I'm talking, if we're talking about money in politics, we're talking about lobbying. Right.
I was moving on. About. No, I moved on from that to you were talking just before I guess interrupted. You mentioned about wanting to have people be able to have the same opportunities. And
right.
They should have.
We should have. Everybody should have a chance to voice their opinion in politics, in our government. This is supposed to be a government of the people, for the people, by the people. And so we want to have the people represented. We don't want to have the people shut out. We want to make sure that people have an opportunity to vote. We want to make sure that we want to make sure that the ears of our leaders are not pulled towards the direction of the fattest wallets.
So
would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that.
Okay.
Would you, but I do want to flush a bit of that out. You mentioned people not having a chance to vote.
Mm-hmm.
Are there people who aren't allowed or who are not given the chance to vote?
Definitely.
Who would that be?
Well, there's huge swaths of people. I mean, there's unconstitutional voter purges going on around the country. There are voter ID laws that are oppressive voter ID laws. I mean, I'm in favor of voter ID laws, by the way, but voter ID laws only after legitimate IDs and that kind of thing are made available and convenient for everybody, which they're currently. So
how would you do that? How would you make them? Because I know in the city I used to live in, that if you went to the BMV and you couldn't afford it, they would make for you an ID for free.
Right. Yeah, and that's not available throughout the country, and so we need to have.
So if everybody had a chance to, so you're not opposed to only allowing people who are citizens of this country to vote. You just
that's already the case,
right? But we're I think part of the reason why there's the voter ID obviously is to help protect from people not in this country voting, but also from people who shouldn't be voting in certain precincts from voting in those precincts and other types of voter fraud. So I would agree with you.
That's what's said is the goal. Yes.
So what do you think is real? I mean, do you really think, listen, do you really someone like me? I think there should be voter ID laws because I think everybody should have the opportunity to vote. I think we should make it as available as possible, as humanly possible for every person to vote in their precinct. And I think
I would agree.
Right. But, I get thrown in and lumped in with some kind of nefarious, not necessarily by you, but by the other side. A lot of times I get thrown in as some kind of person who just hates people of a certain color or a certain class or whatever. And we want to hold them down and we want to keep them from voting. But that's just not the case. That's not the case with anybody that I know of that is for the voter ID laws. They just don't want people to vote that shouldn't be allowed to vote to begin with.
Right. And that problem is so minuscule it's laughable to even consider that that's the real motivation behind those laws.
So what should we do? I guess my question to you is if we're both in agreement that only people who are in this country should be allowed to vote and only people should in the certain precinct that they're voting in should be obviously allowed to vote. If we're both in agreement in that, and we're also both in agreement that we should make it as easy or not as easy, but as available as humanly possible for everyone to have that opportunity to vote, then how would we do this? What steps would we take that we're not already taking?
Well, we need to remove obstacles. We need to remove barriers from people from doing that. If you want to tell somebody that, they have to have a driver's license, but they can't use their housing subsidy identification or something like that. I mean, the people who are underprivileged, very often they have difficulty maintaining records. Maybe they've had tragedies in their lives, or maybe they've had emergencies, or they go through things that middle-class white people don't have to worry about. I don't have to worry about losing.
What do you mean we don't have to worry about this stuff? I don't have to worry about having a fire in my home. I don't have to worry about getting carjacked like anybody else. I lived in one of the most dangerous cities on the planet. Maybe not on the planet, in the U.S. anyhow. I feel like, again, we're slipping back into we're somehow the bad people. Like I'm somehow, I don't know. This to me is just seems opposite of I feel like I'm almost being, like why are we even bringing that up? If there's the opportunity there for them to get that, then they should be able to get that. Right? So like if a BMV is allowing people to come in and get an identification for free that they could use for voting, right? I think that would be fair. Would you agree?
So people in middle class white America don't have to worry about losing their social security card or losing their family records and that kind of thing. Many people have to deal with that. They don't have those kind of records with them because it's difficult for them to deal with the day-to-day, trials of survival, much less maintaining all of their records. And so that's just one barrier. That's just one thing that gets in the way. And then we add another thing. There are some districts where they're shutting down DMV outlets. And so maybe they have to travel, 30 miles to get that ID. But if they can't drive, or if they can't afford a car, or they can't afford to take a day off to go do that kind of thing because it's not going to be open on the weekend or it's not going to be open on the evenings, then they can't do that. That's just a barrier between them, getting the things that they need to do. It's not that they don't want to try. It's just that they can't afford to do it. They can't worry about that kind of thing. They're worried about paying their electric bill. They're worried about, not going bankrupt because their child is sick. They're worried about all these other things. And so, and every little barrier whittles away at their ability to participate in this process. And so if we want to have things like voter ID laws, there's nothing wrong with the voter ID law. That's fine. What the problem is in the implementation. If you encourage those laws, or if you have those laws before you make it so that it's easy for people who should have the IDs to get the IDs, or however you want to do it. We want to make sure that I think we can't pretend that that's the problem, right? We can't pretend that that's the problem. I don't know. Mm-hmm. I don't know what else to say.
Okay. You sound super discouraged. I'll have you know, I have lost my social security card twice. So,
right. And well, that means, so obviously you were able to get another one. Mm-hmm. If you've lost it twice.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to homophobia.
This isn't about you. This isn't about you, by the way.
Right.
It's not about you.
Yeah, I'm not saying it is.
Well, you seem kind of defensive.
I am slightly defensive because I'm the bad guy.
Well, you shouldn't
in every
be.
one of these.
You shouldn't
I'm the
be
bad
because
guy.
it's not about you.
Yeah, but it is. I'm the white.
But I'm a middle
male,
white class
Christian
guy. I'm a middle class white guy too.
Yeah, but I'm the one who's always being called the next. We're coming up here, homophobe. Why don't we talk about that? Because I'm
You're the
one
who said that. You are the only one saying that about you, by the way.
That's not true, because just go look on my wall.
The two of us in this conversation, neither. I'm not accusing you of anything.
You're right.
I think you're a great guy, to be honest.
I appreciate that, Scott.
And so I'm not. I don't think that you. I don't think that you're a racist. I don't think that you're a homophobe. I think that you're misguided on many things. But I don't think that you have a bad heart. If that were the case, then I wouldn't be having this conversation with you.
No, and I appreciate that. I think, and I don't mean to come across defensive, but it's just like, every time I turn around, I'm the one doing something wrong. And I'm not doing anything wrong. Just by being white, male, Christian, I'm automatically lumped into these categories. And I take a beating. So half of my defensiveness isn't like towards you. It's just towards this idea. Like, we're going to talk about homophobia here. I've been accused of that so many times. I can't count how many times. Obviously not by you, just in my experience, in my day-to-day, in my communications with other people. No matter how I try to explain my view, no matter how kind I am in explaining things, or I'm just, because I don't agree with their particular policy or their particular law or their particular thing. It's just, if you don't agree with me, then you are this. And I'm being slapped with a label.
So let's move on. Let's talk about. Join us on the next episode of the God or Not podcast for part 2 of this discussion.
All right. That was brutal.
That was Prejudice.
And that was Prejudice. That's right.
Yep.
And so good conversation, good times. And moving on to our next little bit here is our first installment of the God or Not Book Club. And we are reading, Scott and I, and hopefully at least a few of our listeners are reading the book Sense and Goodness Without God by Richard Carrier. And
you know what? It's okay if nobody else is reading it. That's fine.
Yeah, we're going to read it. Forget you.
We're just doing this for ourselves anyway. We're just letting everybody listen in on our talks.
That's right. So we're going to do a little bit here. This is our God or Not Book Club. Let's go.
This is the God or Not
biggest book club meeting in the world.
Okay, so this is our first installment of our what we're calling is the God or Not Book Club. Mm-hmm. And basically what we're doing is Jamie and I are reading the same book, and we're kind of going through it, and then we're going to, every once in a while, we're going to have a little discussion about it. We're not going to blaze through the book too quickly, because we want to spend a little bit of a time, but we don't want to have like a huge discussion on it. We still want it to be like a little side bit here. And so for our first installment here, we're reading the first 2 sections of the book. The first section, of course, being the introduction. So that was a very short one. So basically just section 2. And so it's like 60 pages or so. And I think that, it was a good amount to begin with.
Yeah, it wasn't too bad.
Yeah, and so I think the way we're going to structure this is, rather than giving a complete blow by blow on how the book went, we'll kind of give a rough outline of the sections that we covered, and then maybe Jamie and I can each pick out some of our favorite parts, and then we can talk about them. And so the first thing that struck me from this book, and this is something that the author addresses fairly early on. And this is a bad thing in my view, in that he had no footnotes and no endnotes. And that really frustrated me. I really would have liked it if he had footnotes and endnotes, because I'm a math teacher. I want to check his work, right? I want to check his work. And so I would have appreciated if there was footnotes or endnotes, but he did include bibliography at the end of each chapter, but apparently that was only in the print edition. So he kind of gave that to you for kind of a further reading kind of thing. But starting off on the wrong foot here. But once I got over that, once I got past that, I did find, in general, I thought it was a fairly interesting read. In fact. There was one quote that I wanted to throw out, and this was, within the first couple of pages. And so this is something he said early on. He said, "Though I'm an atheist in the basic sense that I do not believe that there are any gods, you will find after reading this book that whether a god exists or not really doesn't matter all that much. Every component of my philosophy can be arrived at independently and stands on evidence and reasoning that would not change tomorrow if a god announced himself to the world today. Rather than being a starting assumption, my atheism is but an incidental conclusion from applying my worldview to the current state of evidence." And I don't know, for some reason that really struck me, and I thought that was a really a cool thing to say. So what he's saying is that he didn't go into his process here, with his atheism as kind of like a starting point. It was kind of like a byproduct. That was just a result of
as a matter of fact,
rational thinking and stuff.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, he talks about how early on, he searched. He was on a search that dabbled in in some religious component. So he definitely didn't rule it out to begin with. That's for sure.
Right. I mean, he's definitely a bookworm, and he's very much interested, and has a love of learning, and some of that he just says outright, but some of it I think is apparent in his writing. And that can be, and that's generally a good thing. He talked about how he dabbled in, or he started out, his family was Christian, although not all that, strict. And he kind of dabbled in Taoism a little bit, and then eventually kind of incorporated all of he picked up the best of the little pieces along the way and kind of pieced them together into his philosophy now. He talks a little bit about philosophy, why it's important, about knowledge being a tool for navigating the world, and how philosophy is a tool for navigating information or knowledge. And so I like that. That was his foundation. In fact, he did say specifically that my religion is philosophy. And so he's interested in learning and knowledge. At least he says so. At least that's what he's saying. So that was much of that second section was him kind of talking about his personal history. I didn't think there would be all that much for us to discuss about that, because he doesn't really get into the meat. But I don't know. What was your take on his journey?
Yeah, I have a couple of good things to point out. First, I love the fact that he speaks highly of philosophy and the importance of a good philosophical foundation. There are so many people, like within my camp, within Christendom, who thinks that like philosophy is somehow in religion or somehow in opposition. Like you can't have both. It seems totally ridiculous to me. And then there's other people too in a more scientism kind of camp that completely underplay the role of philosophy, and it's all about the beaker. It's all about science, and so they may be a great biologist or a great cosmologist, but they're a horrible philosopher. And you need philosophy as that foundation in order to, I really think, get anywhere when you're dealing with anything with the mind. And so I love that he stressed the importance of philosophy. I did also think that his, him talking about epistemology, which is like how we know certain things to be true. I thought all that was very practical and very good. So those are a couple of my good takeaways. A couple of the things that I found interesting, or some of my critique.
You found them interesting in an incredibly annoying stone in your shoe kind of way?
That's right. At one point, he talked about that if anything in his book is factually false, like something with, if there was something with enough evidence to persuade the vast majority of experts in the field, he'd like to be notified so he could change his position. I find that ironic because the vast majority of experts in his field, which is New Testament and history, believe that Jesus was a real historical figure. Yet he doesn't. So I found that to be, frustrating. And the other thing that I found to be frustrating is he talked a lot about kind of the role that early Christianity played in his journey, seeking after truth, and about how he found the Bible to be convoluted, and he said that the New Testament hadn't given him anything, like no useful information on the meaning of life or the nature of the universe. And that people who had gotten that out of the Bible must have imported that into the Bible. He said he found the Bible shallow and unsatisfying. I just found that amazing, because that's all Jesus talked about was meaning, the meaning of life, how we should live, purpose, and not to mention like the religious component of it. The Bible is considered to be one of the greatest books of literature of all time. I mean, just take completely all the religion out of it. No, I'm serious. Like,
well, come on. I think you're being.
It is the most.
You've read the Bible, right?
It's the most purchased book ever, and it is considered by people in literature to be one of the greatest works of literature of all time.
Yeah, and The Bachelor is one of the most popular TV shows ever. Okay, so that's not. So we're not talking about cinematic genius here.
No, I'm not talking. I'm not talking about the truthfulness of the Bible. I'm just talking about mere literature.
You said as literature,
right? Yeah. If
really?
You look, yes. This might be another instant replay. If you go and you look at people within that sphere, they consider the Bible to be one of the greatest pieces of conglomerates of literature ever. You don't sound convinced.
I definitely am not.
I just found it frustrating that he found it so useless. You know, like, this was, and so many millions and millions of people find it so fruitful and rich and with depth. And I don't know. I just found that confusing.
Okay.
But other than that, like I said, I do want to make sure that I harp on not just the bad, but the good. And
you want to harp on the good too?
Well, if you want to call it harp, yes, I will harp. My wife says I'm good at harping. So the philosophy, his stress on philosophy, and I got some good takeaways from him talking about, getting to truth and how we get to that. So I did enjoy those parts.
Yeah. The last basically the last third or one half of the portion that we read, he was really kind of, you mentioned laying a foundation, and that's really what he was doing. He talked about different types of statements and how, the truth of something and how, things, we value statements based on whether or not they can make predictions, which I assume that he meant kind of like how it aligns with reality and that kind of thing. There was one little bit in there that, I already mentioned that I was frustrating with the lack of footnotes. There was another frustration that I had, in that he talked about Alvin Plantinga for a little bit. And he mentioned Plantinga's Reformed epistemology, which I have to admit I was not really all that familiar with. And to be frank, I'm still not all that familiar with it. I thought he mentioned it, and it was just a few pages long. And I really think that he presented it as an approach to epistemology that he disagreed with, but I felt that his presentation of Plantinga's side was a little brief, and I would have liked, because I didn't come away feeling I really understood what it was.
Right.
And I also thought that his refutations were also kind of thin. Now, that's not to say that maybe he's written at greater length elsewhere.
Right.
But, it seemed to me like he could have just left that part out. And that, and the fact that there were no footnotes that I could use to look up extra information about this. But I will have to admit that he did pique my interest, and so now that might be something that I want to look into.
I think that you would be interested in that. It's one of the main components of Plantinga's Reformed epistemology is the idea that the belief in God is a properly basic belief.
Right.
That's the primary. That's like that you can hold your head up. Basically, you could hold your head up, and not feel like you have to evidentially support that idea, and that people can walk away and have that innate sense of there being some the divine, so to speak. That's that's why it piqued my curiosity, because to me that sounds just like the biggest cop out ever. And so I at least want to give Plantinga a chance to make his case. I think that you'll enjoy it, because it isn't just like, well, I feel it, therefore it is. It's not like this experiential. There is a lot to it. I've read some of Plantinga's work, and he's top rate. He's not a slouch. Okay. I mean, okay. Listen, let me ask you a question, a serious question. Is there anybody in our camp that you go, yeah, he's pretty good at what he does?
Oh, I think they're good at what they do. I don't think their arguments are all that convincing. Otherwise, I'd be a Christian.
Well, but that's what I'm referring to when I say he's not a slouch. I mean, he was, chair in Notre Dame. I mean, it's not like he's some fly by night somewhere that he's got some chops that he's put some time in, and he has he's got some meat to his arguments. Whether you agree or disagree with him, it's still, what I'm saying is that he has to be taken seriously. And that's what I think there are a lot of people in the atheist camp or the naturalist community that I take very seriously because their arguments warrant that. So,
well, hey, you know what? Now that you bring it up, now that you mention it, this has just happened in just the last few days online. I was having a discussion, still am actually. I haven't gotten back to him today, with Josh Rasmussen.
Yes.
Okay. So you told me, watch out because he's no slouch, and I thought that was a weird thing to say. I thought, oh, that's awesome that he's not a slouch. And from my limited interaction with him so far, he seems to at least is. So I want to know, basically, if I'm interacting with somebody who's arguing with me, I want two things out of you. One, I want you to listen to what I say, and I want you to, and I want you to consider what I say. I'm not interested in talking to somebody who, who's just reading off a script. Two, I want you to be able to back up what you say. I want you to answer my questions. And so far, my experience with Josh has been positive in those directions. I don't. It's still, we're still in the middle of a discussion here. I don't know if he's given me, we're getting off track here. We're getting off track. Anyway, I just wanted to say that I thought I agreed with you that I didn't think he was a slouch. So I don't want to come off as saying, I'm just poo-pooing everybody. Right.
No, I did see that. I did see your conversations, and I will have you know that I followed almost none of it. That stuff, that the philosophy of the mind, that kind of thing, that is out of my wheelhouse, buddy.
Okay.
So,
all right.
I tried.
Well, there's to bring it back around to the book club here. there was one. Some of this might hit the cutting room floor, I'm guessing.
Right.
But there was one last little bit, and it was the last little piece from that from the section that we were reading, and it was on method. And I think that you had said that you liked this part too. And basically, he said he had this hierarchy of methods, and just. He goes into a lot more detail, but basically he's saying, like, reason, that's going to be the top level as far as method for justifying belief, right? If you can make a strong, reasonable argument, then that's like the pinnacle of this hierarchy of method. Then below that, which is actually a subset of reason, then would be science. If you can perform a scientific experiment, or a group of scientists can gather evidence and come to conclusions and that kind of thing. So science then would be the next level down, and then below that is going to be just individual experience. What have you seen in your life? What have you done in your life? That kind of thing. That's going to be something that motivates your beliefs as well.
Right.
Then the next level below that was history. So we can use history as a foundation for belief, but it's definitely has a place in the hierarchy there. The next one, which was below history, which at first I thought seemed out of place, because he said expert testimony. And at first I thought that was odd. That seemed out of place. That should be kind of up in the science area, I thought. But then I realized what he meant by that was that just taking an expert's word on it.
Right.
Okay.
The appeal to authority. Yeah.
Exactly. Right. So if you have no reasoning behind your belief, no science, no experience, nothing in history, then, so now we're getting down into the areas where it's kind of shaky, but kind of like, well, you got to base your belief on something. You got to do something. You can't just stand there motionless.
Right.
Until
I can't do all the experiments myself. I can't
exactly. Right.
I can't do all some of these. So a lot of this stuff, I'm either going to get through reasoning it out or reading it, or learning it from someone else. Yeah.
So expert testimony without because usually when an expert says something, they'll say, here's what I think, and here's the mountain of evidence to support it. And so if that's the case, then we're not talking about expert testimony. We're talking about, one of these higher level science and so forth. So then below expert testimony was plausible inference, what seems like it works. And, of course, we know that our human brains kind of go all over the place and are full of biases and so forth. So plausible inference is barely below the bottom one. And I know this is a pet peeve of yours, but the last one he said was pure faith. And of course, what he meant there was not the kind of faith that you talk about when you use the word faith, but what he meant was just basically I'd just make a guess at it. Right. And so that was the worst
how I took
possible.
that as well. Yeah. That's how I took
good.
that as well.
Yeah. So I thought that was an excellent way to finish off that opening section. I think I'm looking forward to the next few sections. I find his writing style to be very easy to follow along, to be very easy to listen to.
For our listeners, but for our listeners, I'm doing the Audible book because I do a lot of driving, commuting, and so it works out best that way. And he actually narrates his own book, and dare I say that he's easy to listen to. So not only is his writing style just kind of I don't want to say chummy, but easy to listen to. I mean, it's easy to read through or to listen to his stuff, and so he does bring up
like technical terms, but doesn't overwhelm you with jargon kind of thing, which is very easy to do in some of these types of books.
Yep.
So, any last words on that first read then?
No. I hope that the rest of the book is about as good as this, because I enjoyed it.
Now we're getting into the meat now.
Yeah,
we're getting into the
I had
meat
some
and
things
potatoes.
I liked about it and some things I didn't like about it, and I hope that it continues that way. So yeah, it was good.
Well, so for our next assignment here we're going to cover now section 3. That's the next section, and it's a long one, and so we're going to cut that in half. So we're going to read through section 3, parts 1 through 5. And so for those of you with the print version of the book, that's going to be pages 63 to 134. So a little bit longer than the first reading assignment, but hopefully it'll be stock full of fun stuff that we can chew on next time. And that's it. I mean, that was our first installment of the God or Not Book Club.
And that about wraps it up for episode number 12. Please send us your ideas, questions, and comments to email@godornotpodcast.com. If you'd like to know more about the topics covered in this episode, Scott, what do you recommend?
Scott recommends, I think it would be more accurate to describe this as a tome rather than a book. It's a very hefty 700 plus pages. And so I haven't read it cover to cover, but I've read most of it. And the book is The Better Angels of Our Nature, Why Violence Has Declined by Steven Pinker. It was tough for me to find a book that I've read related to prejudice. And so I thought I'd flip it the other way. And Steven Pinker talks about how over the last the last few centuries, actually violence and violent crime and things like that have actually been on the decline. And he talks about how various movements have impacted the environment and the environment of violence and interactions and social interactions and so forth. And Steven Pinker, of course, is a psychologist. And so there's plenty of psychoanalysis involved in the textbook, right? But there's just tons and tons of data in here, and it's just it's really interesting. It is kind of hefty, but it's also the kind of book where you can read chunks of it here and there. So
right.
So I definitely recommend it, and there's kind of a positive type message to it. It's not all roses and right. I was going to say roses and cauliflower, but that's not a happy thing. It's not all roses and chocolate, but
there it is, right?
But definitely it's a book worth reading. It's called The Better Angels of Our Nature by Steven Pinker. Why Violence Has Declined. So what do you got for us?
Very good. I have The Four Loves by C.S. Lewis. And we were talking about prejudice. And so both you and I, one of the things that we came to an agreement on in our discussion is that we shouldn't be prejudiced towards anybody. That we should try our very best to treat people fairly and to love people. And so I thought The Four Loves by C.S. Lewis was appropriate. And so that is what I recommend. Scott and I want to thank you for joining us, and we hope you'll be back next time when Scott and I will be talking about Prejudice.
Round 2.
Until then, this is your dialectic duo reminding you to talk to each other.
See ya.
This has been the God or Not podcast. Send your questions or comments to email at godornotpodcast.com. If you'd like to support the show or grab some God or Not gear, please visit the website at www.godornotpodcast.com. Thanks for listening.